Hello and welcome, dear viewers, to Cases. I'm your host, Farah Atoui. President Al-Assad has signed the legislative decree providing for the accession of Syria to the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, Stockpiling and Use of Chemical Weapons and on their destruction of 1992. But under one condition, that US will retreat from launching any strike against Syria, an initiative that Russia saw necessary to halt any war from happening. However, the Chemical Weapons Convention that Syria signed, Israel signed it too, but never ratified it until today. Unlike Syria, Israel is suspected to have a stockpile of chemical weapons, but Tel Aviv is not criticized because of this. No UN inspectors ever visited the Israeli military compounds. Even the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons was never signed by Israel, although everybody knows that the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, possesses nuclear weapons. The UN wanted to investigate in Israel last time in 2009, but the position of Tel Aviv is very clear. Israel will not cooperate in any matter with this resolution. How come Syria is obliged to sign the treaty to avoid any war? At times Israel possesses chemical weapons, but no one is threatening to launch any war. What are the legal conventions that Israel is breaching with such a decision? In such case, what's the role of the International Court of Justice, ICJ? For more on this, I'm joined here in the studio by Dr. Souheil and Natour, a professor of law and a legal researcher. Hello and welcome to Cases, Doctor.
You're welcome to.
If you may allow us now at the beginning, we'll watch a report that would give us more information about our own subject. Dear viewers, we will take a look and be right back.
The plans to attack Syria, mainly elaborated by France, the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and the Arab GCC countries, hinge on the question of chemical weapons.
I have decided that the United States should take military action against Syrian regime targets.
Now, the United States, the country that led this world coalition to punish the Syrian regime for allegedly using chemical weapons, had been the first to launch a nuclear attack in recent history. On August 6, 1945, the United States attacked the city of Hiroshima in Japan, using a massive nuclear weapon and leaving tens of thousands of civilians dead. And while all Japan was still under terrific shock, the United States struck again, this time in Nagasaki.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. We won the race of discovery against the Germans. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's...
Although chemicals were used as tools of war for thousands of years, for example as poisoned arrows, modern chemical warfare has its genesis on the battlefield of World War I. The first country to experience a large-scale chemical attack using chlorine gas was Leproz City in Belgium on April 22, 1915. Lately, Syria has been the focal point of many Western countries as they accused it for an alleged use of chemical weapon against its people. On its part, Syria has submitted a formal instrument of accession to the United Nations as the dispository, which as of December 12 was being translated. The treaty enters into force for an acceding party 1 month after their deposit of an instrument of accession. On this level, one of the key points of the Chemical Weapon Convention, which entered into force in 1997, is that state parties have to refrain from the use of chemical weapons and work to destroy any stockpiles of chemical weapons that may hold and any facilities which produce them, as well as any chemical weapons they abandoned on the territory of other states' parties in the past. In this sense, the United States of America is a violator of this specific convention by the use of depleted uranium during the invasion of Iraq in 2003. In the absence of any international lawful justice, what has the UN done so far to punish the United States and Israel for their use of chemical weapons in their wars against Iraq, Lebanon, and Gaza?
Dr. Souheil, before, of course, speaking about the legal perspective of the whole issue, in your opinion, of course, speaking about politics, not about law at the beginning, how did you read the Russian initiative that it submitted to Syria?
Well,
concerning, of course, sending
it's a kind of the general political game of the international relations between Russia and the USA. The ambition of the existing president of Russia was all the time very clear, is to continue the advancement of Russia to play a role the same which was lost when the Soviet Union was finished. And this is an opportunity to make an opponent to the US when the American administration made that gaffe by threatening to strike Syria. It was an occasion which was played diplomatically and politically with cleverness by the Russian regime.
Of course, a lot said that this is a Russian diplomacy that is perfect, and that by itself changed the balance of power in the region. And now people are not looking at the government or the US government in a way that it's a respectful way. Meanwhile, the Russian took all the attention as the people who became great mediators and those who can speak about diplomacy and act upon diplomacy, unlike Obama, that his image was demolished or even devastated with all these talks that he made lately, calling for war, and unlike Putin, for example.
Well, there are factors which help to give this impression on the image. On one hand, when Obama threatened to attack, it wasn't by a very strict words, meaning that he's seriously going even to the out limit of any involvement in war, because that is contradictory to the base of his election, that he is going to leave the areas of war in Afghanistan and Iraq after the heavy experience of the Americans there. So he was hesitating in confirming everything at the beginning. This was one factor. The second, which was a big blow to the diplomacy of Mr. Obama, that the vote in the British Parliament, which vetoed this possibility that Britain is always playing the role of a tail of dog.
That was the starting point of a U-turn, let me say here.
I mean,
because they did not gain David Cameron's support or enough support expected from Britain, we've seen that kind of a U-turn.
On one hand, it's historic, because never in the history of Britain to contradict a proposal by their prime minister, and it was happened only one time in the 17th century, 18th century, when they asked for deployment more arms to go to USA against the revolution of liberation of USA that time from the British occupation. And this is after 200 years to happen. It's something very important that the public opinion of the British was not with the American policy concerning the strike. But also there is something third element which encouraged the Russians to play it, that the public opinion in the USA was negative. So Obama was not gaining to all the support he was expecting, and he was going back one step to the Congress asking for legitimacy. That moment came the proposal of so that's why when we say a brilliant diplomatic coup, it was done by the
Doctor, if you
Russians.
want to speak about the timing of such an initiative, when the Russian asked the Syrians to keep their chemical weapons under international law, a lot of people questioned the timing. Some said that probably because things were at the edge and the war was about to happen, especially with all this shipment that we've seen on the board, of course on the seas. Everyone was ready, and that's why the Russians wanted to save these stands, and they came up with that initiative and asked Syrians to send their weapons and put them under the international
There is something of the truth behind it, because if we see it from the American point of view, that in the Congress, the majority are the Republicans, are not the party of the president.
Yes.
And they were pushing for war. If he retreats, that means something wrong in the American diplomacy.
Yes.
And he doesn't want to pay this price. So he was searching for something to put him slowly from above the ladder he made for himself and to go down step by step.
Okay.
And that was a salvation proposal.
Doctor, we've got the latest on Syria concerning the chemical weapons. We will read them to our own viewers and then continue our own conversation. According to the Associated Press, UN inspectors say there is convincing evidence chemical weapons were used on large scale in Syria. According to BBC, UN Chief Ban Ki-moon tells the Security Council the use of chemical weapons in Syria is a war crime. According to CNN, President Obama's plan for international control of Syria's chemical weapons could end world threat. Reuters, however, said French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius said UN inspectors' report shows no doubt Assad government responsible for August 21 chemical attack. Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons says the plan to destroy the Syrian chemical weapons will begin in few days. According to The Guardian, UK, France and US Syria must comply with UN over chemical weapons. Of course, these are latest news today, Dr. Souheil. The war will happen, in your opinion? Are we saying that diplomacy have failed here?
No. I can say that those who were preparing the public opinion to make a strike failed in two things. On one hand, they tried to attract the attention of the population that the strike is small, it's not big.
Certain points will be targeted.
Now no one is convinced of this because could be a small one, but after that they discovered that the order for the American army is to widen all the preparations on Syria. Second, that those who were very encouraged that America is going to make the strike and they were behind to collect the results expected for them against the Syrian people interest. I think now they are failed, and in the eyes of their public, it's something that you are adopting a policy which is not convenient, and this is why they are trying to jeopardize the climate of pacification which was created by the agreement between the Americans and the Russians.
Okay, Russians asked the Syrians to sign the chemical weapons agreement, and the Syrians accepted that. If you want to take the legal perspective of this and certain kind of definition of what the Chemical Weapons Convention is, what do we know about it, and is it of that importance in your own opinion?
Well, the International Convention is widely known for those who are experts in the field.
Yes.
And it was repeated many times in Arab countries, especially after the case in Libya for the nuclear weapons and in Iraq for the chemical weapons
of mass destruction
and
also.
many parts of it. But in the details, everyone was thinking that this is only a kind of supervision of the chemical weapons and the storage of these chemical weapons. But practically, the convention is, many parts of it includes the destruction of this quantities stored. But unfortunately for the truth, that every country
is obliged to sign it.
Who signed or ratified, some of them ratified, but also they didn't get rid of all the chemical weapons. They have it because they are afraid still of the reasons of wars could be in. So America still have a lot of chemical weapons, and Israel even never signed. No, they signed the chemical weapons agreement, but not ratified. And at the same time, if you see for the Arabs, when they negate the presence of the things, some of them prepared, and like in Iraq, but when they were discovered under the pressure of the Western in favor of Israel, because everything in the policy adopted by the US is to make the safety complete for Israel.
Okay.
That's why they didn't mention Israel.
But probably here, Doctor, as if the convention is a kind of a savior, because according to what we highlighted from CNN, President Obama planned for international control of Syria's chemical weapons could end world threat. So as if signing this petition or this convention can stop any war from happening in a country, or it's not enough here?
No, in the matter of laws, everyone knows that interpretation of the laws and how to apply these interpretations
is more important than the law itself.
It's more important, and it's political.
Yes.
So that's why when there is a convention or a law, even all the powers who are ratifying this and accepting to the controller in the play of how to supervise the things and how to destroy, and there are a lot of issues to be confirmed with good faith in application, but practically not a single country was doing this with clarity.
Okay, to speak in details about this convention, Doctor, the convention is administered by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, known as OPCW, which acts as the legal platform for specification of the CWC provisions. The Conference of the States Parties is mandated to change the CWC, pass regulations on implementation of CWC requirements. Does it also ensure here the compliance of member states? I mean, once these member states sign the treaty or even ratify it, then that's it, or they have to even go and follow these countries to see if they're still acquiring the chemical weapons after signing the convention?
The convention is not indicating anyway how to control the things by force if the state party is not in compliance with the application. Because using the force to comply this sometimes is worse than using the diplomacy. So that's why it's open for interpretation and the balance of forces in this. I think that there is no single case that any country who was refusing to destroy his arms could be obliged by the others.
Okay. Dr. Souheil, we will take a first break today's episode. Dear viewers, stay tuned.
Beyond the lines, beyond the surface. Depth, clarity, substance. Beyond the discourse.
Beyond politics, beyond the shallowness of everyday politics.
Dear viewers, welcome back. Doctor, also according to Reuters, French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius says UN inspectors, of course we're reading this because this is the latest breaking news up till now, the UN inspectors report shows no doubt Assad government responsible for August 21 chemical attack. Now, the question mark here is that at the beginning, the UN mandate inside Syria was not to actually understand who was behind the attack. It's more saying if the chemical weapons were used inside Syria. And now it turns out to be that they are giving specific answers of who was behind it. I mean, how do you read this?
I read it that this is an attempt from the French actual government to try to play a role in the Middle East.
Yes.
On one hand, taking the occasion that they had all the time were against the regime and how to interpret why they are supporting all the rebels by arms and capacities.
Yes.
Three, that they were expecting that they will be recollecting a lot of benefits after the Americans will be number two, like what happened in Libya. It was the British number two after the Americans benefits. I think this is an attempt, especially there is something special with this actual Laurent Fabius,
Yes.
because he is one of the most Zionist ministers in France, and he is trying to comfort Israel the maximum, even out of the expectations of the Israelis themselves. So that's why he is not only saying what was said in this closed closed session,
Yes.
but he is trying to interpret the things as it is given. It's not given. And he used that there is no doubt. Probably he may also, there is no doubt who is using the arms. Okay, everyone knows that the chemical arms were used, but the accusation is that the rebels used it to create a problem and to drag the others from outside to attack the Syria and to get rid of the regime.
Unfortunately, or even shockingly, if we can say, I mean, John Kerry, U.S. Secretary of State, admitted that the rebels might be the ones behind the use of chemical weapons. I mean, where would that keep John Kerry here at times where he was accelerating in his tone and in a war to happen inside Syria? Wouldn't that lose his own credibility?
No, this is something we have to take it into consideration, we Arabs, when we discuss. Everyone is reflecting the interest of his country and his regime. So the Americans, they have an interest not to go to war in the area and not to send their army guys, because everyone killed will influence the situation inside America. And the others, the Europeans, they prefer to send these GIs and to be killed or not to be killed, but at least to finish with they supposed to be their enemy in the area. So I think that Kerry is very cautious about saying an accusation clearly. He is asking the same diplomacy like his president to give more time for investigation and then taking a long time of preparations in case they
but
need.
at the same time, Doctor, his new stance can actually weaken his position in case he is trying to actually launch an attack on Syria. And of course now with this tremendous French support to them and him saying that probably the rebels are the one behind it. So wouldn't that weaken his position if he wanted to go out to the public again, especially to the US public, and say that a war would occur inside Syria?
Well, we can take it from the other side also, saying that why this foreign ministers meeting happened today. And it was from France, America, and the British, and Turkish also. Why? Because the Americans, they don't want to be cornered by their allies. At the same time, they don't want to be going on under the pressure of their allies to a very wide adventure, which they may lose a lot of things in it. That doesn't mean they don't have the might to destroy the regime in Syria. But that means also they are making the account of losses and gains inside. While the others, they consider themselves behind the main power, and so they want to encourage. And in this, I think the meeting was from Mr. Kerry to restrain the others, not to continue pushing. Otherwise, if America will find themselves not capable to go by a veto from the Congress or something, that the others cannot do anything, and The president of France said it clearly, I am going to move after the American decision, not before.
Okay, Doctor, with now this news of the UN inspectors showing that no doubt, according to them, the Assad government was responsible for this attack, does it make it legal for the United States now to attack Syria?
This is not on the name of UN. This is a party who is hostile to the regime in Syria and saying this opinion. But he's trying to build his terminology that it is based on the UN inspectors. Well, the UN inspectors clear is not indicating clearly who is responsible. That's why Ban Ki-moon, in the same, when he addressed the press, he said, this delegation is going back to continue the investigation. If it's clearly showing that the regime is responsible, why to make it again?
Okay. Dr. Naim Salem, a professor of international affairs at Notre Dame University, is joining us. Hello and welcome to Cases, Dr. Naim.
You're welcome.
Dr. Naim, Israel justifies its weapons of mass destruction stockpile by saying that it guarantees its safety and its own sovereignty. Of course, and it gives it that kind of sort of protective armor against any Arab armies. Unexpectedly, the world community gives it the support needed here. How do you see this amid calls for Syria to give their own chemical weapons to international law?
Well, the war on Syria, which was begun 2.5 years ago, has been used to weaken Syria and along with Syria to weaken the Arab world as a whole. The threats against Syria will over. Following the alleged chemical attack in near Damascus, which the Syrian government was accused of and falsely accused for, and clearly, according to various reports, it was done by various opposition groups backed by foreign power. This has been used by Western power, namely the United States, as an excuse to attack Syria, to weaken Syria, and to disarm Syria of strategic weapons.
Okay, but here, Dr. Naim, President Bashar al-Assad actually said that these chemical weapons are there to protect, in order to protect Syria from any attack, especially from the Israelis. However, his words were not taken for granted and was not respected, and he was still saying or even receiving pressure to actually give these chemical weapons and keep them under international law. However, Israel is saying the same thing. It's giving the same excuses for maintaining WMD, but no one is actually criticizing that move.
Everyone knows, whether in the West or in the Middle East, that Israel is a nuclear power. It possesses between 200 and 250 nuclear warheads. So the Arabs, for several decades now, they have been trying to create a counter-deterrence to the Israeli nuclear power. And this counter-deterrence, some of them sought to use the chemical weapon arsenal in order to deter Israel from attacking Syria or Iraq or other states by nuclear weapons. So these, out of fear, the Arab states have resorted to creating a stockpile of chemical weapons out of fear of the nuclear arsenal possessed by Israel. No more, no less. Everyone knows that these chemical weapons are not supplied by, are not created by states or manufactured by states in order to be used. This has been the case since World War I. The last time chemical weapons were used on a large scale in World War I. And Syria, for all practical purposes, has been trying to use those weapons as a deterrence, not to be attacked by Israel or other states. Now, the attempt by the West to disarm Syria of whatever stockpiles exists in Syria of chemical weapons does not mean that Syria will be taken out of the correlation for in the Middle East. In reality, the Syrians could not use those weapons. Those weapons have been created by states or manufactured by states, not for actual were used.
Dr. Naim, what would the losses be when Syria gives these chemical weapons to the international law or keeps it under the international law? What are the losses here?
Well, from the past precedent, it was West which has used chemical weapons. Not other countries have used chemical weapons.
Yes.
It was used on a limited scale by Iraq during the Iran-Iraq war by Saddam Hussein. But otherwise, most of the usage of chemical weapons was used, first of all, by Western power, specifically the British and the French and the German during World War I. And afterwards by the British against the Russians. Between 1920 and 1923, 10 towns in Russia were bombed with chemical weapons by the British. And the Americans themselves have used it on a larger scale, a chemical weapon called Agent Orange. They used tens of thousands of tons of those Agent Orange to bomb Vietnam with them. So it is ironic that the Western powers who have long used chemical weapons are now coming to give lectures to other countries, including Middle Eastern countries, on the use or not to use those chemical weapons. But ironically, it is the element of power. It is a power and which governs the international system. And the Western countries...
Okay, so are we saying here that actually politics
possess a preponderant power
Dr. Naim,
dictate to other states?
Dr. Naim, does that mean that we are actually doubting the credibility of these conventions or even saying that politics overtakes conventions and legal perspective? Because that's a point that Dr. Souheil Natour was actually highlighting too. Are we living in an era where politics takes over international laws?
Let me point out, the Chemical Weapons Convention, which was launched in 1993, it means 20 years, exactly 20 years ago, has been signed up till now by 193 states. And this week, or last week, to be sure, the Syrian government has declared that it will be a signatory to the Chemical Weapons Convention. So now the absolute majority of states in the international system have become signatories to the Chemical Weapons Convention. Only Israel, one state or two states in the international system, one of them Israel, which so far has refused to ratify. It has signed it in the past, the Chemical Weapons Convention, but has refused
and away from
to ratify
Israel also, speaking about law breachers here, we will also have to remind our viewers that even the US used depleted uranium in Iraq. And we've got a history here, where the US, and the US is a signatory and also ratified the CWC.
That's a good point which you just mentioned. The use of depleted uranium, which has been on the increase by Western power, particularly the United States and Israel. In Iraq, hundreds of tons of depleted uranium were used on Iraq, and the same in Afghanistan. The depleted uranium is a very dangerous weapon. Its substance remains on the ground and in the underground water for not only years, for dozens and hundreds of years. Iraq, for instance, has been most of the territories of Iraq, from Basra south to the central Iraq, to Baghdad, to Fallujah, particularly in Fallujah, exceeding huge tons of depleted uranium and other weapons of mass destruction were used on the town of Fallujah. So those who are coming to lecture the world, the rest of the world, including us in the Arab world, about the use or not use of chemical weapons, are themselves the first users of those chemical weapons all over the world, particularly against the Arab and the Muslim population.
Yes, and this of course summarizes that these conventions are only pen to paper. They're not applicable, and there are no mandates that can force these countries to abide by the signatures, right? That's our point.
Actually, most of the countries which have signed the Chemical Weapons Convention are strictly been abiding as far as the uses of so-called CW or chemical weapons. But the Western advanced countries have trespassed the CWs and have gone into something new, which is the usage of depleted uranium.
Yes.
And this is even more dangerous than the chemical weapons use, because it remains with consequences for hundreds of years. And as long as the depleted uranium, there is no regulations to limit the use or totally prevent depleted uranium from usage in warfare, the Chemical Weapons Convention will remain will have a great shortcoming.
Okay, Dr. Naim Salem, Professor of International Affairs at Notre Dame University in Beirut, thank you for participation.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Dear viewers, we will take a final break and be right back. Stay tuned.
The crisis of capitalism, the European impasse, the energy shortages, the emerging power of Asia, the economic power of the Arab world, the economic debate, informative, revealing, and progressive. It discusses the economic event of the world.
Economic debate, where the numbers reveal the truth.
Dear viewers, welcome back. Dr. Souheil, what does it mean to Syria if it lost its own chemical armors?
Well, frankly, I have to confess that this is a very problematic and not acceptable solution for granted.
Yes.
It has something reflecting about the weakness of the Arabs in general. And making the comparison between Syria and Israel. That happened and experienced before with Libya. The Libyan regime surrounded everything with his nuclear industry, with promising to be abiding by non-proliferation. But after 2-3 years, there was this big assault on Libya, and Libya is now destroyed completely without the capacity even to threaten on the attackers. I think I'm afraid in one of the aspects that we have reason not to be confident of the promises of the West, this experience of Libya, which is very recent, that the regime of Syria, when delivering the arms, is something of his power that the others are fearing his use. Second, if we see that the
probably that's the only threat that Syria holds.
It's one of the elements of the power of Syrian regime, that he has something to inflict big losses on the enemy.
And we can go as far as saying that even Bashar Assad said if the chemical weapons should be kept onto the international community, you should also guarantee a war not to happen. Probably also on one hand, we are also facing another catastrophe.
Yes, but still also, if you give it, that means Israel, which is not inspected, not recognizing that they have, and not asked also to make vice versa, surrendering their arms. That means Israel is much more powerful than ever before, and paying no attention.
Yes, exactly, and that's the shocking part here, is that why is it Israel, why does it have the green light to actually not sign these treaties or such conventions, or the non-proliferation treaty also, in order to protect its own sovereignty? Meanwhile, when Syria submits the same justifications, it's not accepted.
Minimizing the capacity of preserving the sovereignty of Syria, frankly. Second, there is also another dangerous prospect of it if it's used with the bad intentions of the West against Iran. It's something knocking the bell for Iran that we did it.
With Syria, we
with
can
Syria,
do it with Iran.
and we fabricated all the pretexts.
Exactly.
So Iran, you can be repeated the same story on your capacities, even that we don't know if you have an intention to create the bomb.
The Russian initiative was not for Syria's safety here, or it wasn't the right decision.
It's not
or
only
the
limited
right
on that.
solution?
It's not only limited. It's targeting Syria.
Okay.
But one of the things that it is a lesson to the other states on Iraq, on Iran on one hand, and a lesser level on Egypt, because Egypt also has some kind of industry. And I think this is very dangerous, because now the Americans are trying to manipulate all the situation in the Arab world, country by country, to weakening everything to be under the yoke of the Israeli impositions and orders. On the other hand, the Arabs are continuing their dividends and their schism, and some of the Arabs are financing the attack against Syria.
Yes.
Third, if Iran and the other countries which showed something unacceptable even to the public opinion, that Russia is deciding now the future of Syria without even the role of the Syrian regime to say they abide by the proposal of Russia.
But they've got no another choice out, Doctor. If it's not for the giving of the chemical weapons, then we're not looking at a solution here.
No, there is something that they are avoiding the destruction of the country completely and quickly by the American weaponry, which
and
is
the price is heavy,
devastating.
obviously.
But that doesn't mean they are avoiding the possibility of war. Until now,
so
the
that's what we
Americans
were
are
saying.
threatening.
Probably they can be losing at both sides here. Doctor, if you wanted to speak more about the conventions, what's the difference between the non-proliferation treaty and the chemical weapons convention? Is it the same here? Why was Syria asked to sign the CWC specifically?
No, the content, the aim is the same.
Okay.
The wide destruction capacity of the arms, non-regular arms as usual. But the difference of the casualties and the results on the destruction with the chemical is less than with the nuclear, which destroys the whole land and property and people. While with the chemical, sometimes it's only influencing some areas and for a period, short period. And
so when speaking about the non-proliferation treaty, we're speaking about nuclear weapons, not about chemical weapons.
No.
The CWC is about
the chemical weapons, which could be limited in areas, while the nuclear is wider and much worse in this country. So both of them are against humanity, but at least with good faith from all, we can have a transparency in the application.
Okay, speaking more about the non-proliferation treaty, a total of 190 parties have joined the treaty, with 5 states being recognized as nuclear weapons states, Doctor, so including, of course, the 5 permanent members in the UN, United States, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, and even China. What does it mean when they sign the treaty and they are also seen as weapons, nuclear weapon states? What does it mean here?
Because there was a big storage of these nuclear weapons in every country. So they said, okay, we recognize this, but in the prospect, and they made an agreement and they made an application of it to diminish the amount of nuclear weapons in their storage. And they began to destroy part after part, but it was seized after something, a problematic application between the Americans and the Russians for a time. But most of what was stored, yes, it was destroyed.
Okay. Critics say that non-nuclear weapons signatories are angry with the fact that nuclear weapon states signed the treaty and they still have the nuclear weapons, and that actually allowed them to question here themselves and back from signing any petition or any convention, even believing in all these conventions. Is it now a threat when we've got inside these conventions names of countries who are signatories and who are nuclear weapon states, but they're still signing it and not abiding by the rules?
No, they are saying that we had it.
Okay.
and we know the danger of it. So we don't want to destroy ourselves by shooting in nuclear.
Okay.
So stop it and begin to destroy for the recognized nuclear states. This is one. But all of us and the whole world must be stopping the others to carry the capacity of having nuclear weapons. That's why they didn't accept the North Korea attempt to have nuclear weapons, and they don't accept even to have production of the civil use of nuclear without their supervision. So in many countries, like in Germany, in Japan, there are nuclear weapons, but for civil use. In Iran, because they want to have in civil use, and they don't recognize, because politically they are using their might to threaten Iran and to threaten the Arabs now with these capacities.
Okay. We're joined now by Kevork Almassian, a political analyst. Hello and welcome, Mr. Kevork, to Cases.
Thank you, Farah.
You're welcome. Kevork, what does it mean today when Syria gives its own chemical weapons and keeps it under international community at times where other states used it and signed this petition but never abide by it?
Actually, I want to remind the viewers of a brief history of who used chemical and biological and nuclear weapons. The first usage of a biological weapon was in 1763. It was by the British General Geoffrey Amherst, who ordered the use of smallpox blankets against the Native Americans during the Pontiac's Rebellion. And this incident has been repeated again and again against the Native Americans during the World War II, the use of the nuclear weapons on Japan. And then the recent example was in Syria. In Syria, the chemical weapon, according to a new classified document which was obtained by WND. WND is an organization which deals with security issues. They obtained a document by U.S. Intelligence Community's National Intelligence Center. This document says the United States confirms that sarin gas was confiscated early this year from members of Jabhat al-Nusra.
Yes.
Jabhat al-Nusra is Al-Qaeda affiliated group. Then this seizure of the chemical weapons occurred in May 2013 when the Turkish anti-terror police discovered a 2-kilogram cylinder with sarin gas while searching homes in the Turkish side of the border. And these gas were transferred into Syria, and then it was used in Khan al-Assal area in Aleppo. And then it was a false flag attack happened in Al-Ghouta in order to trigger a foreign invasion of Syria. We have to see who benefited from this attack. The only party who was benefited was the so-called rebels, because they were calling for foreign intervention for a long time. They don't have any kind of balance of power on the ground. So they need a foreign assistance by money and weapons in order to...
Of course, Kevork, speaking about history, and history here is very important. Also on August 6, 1945, the United States attacked the city of Hiroshima and Japan with nuclear weapons. I'm saying this to say, wouldn't this long history of these powerful countries that used chemical weapons, that used nuclear weapons along the region with all these years that passed, give the Syrian government a stronger position here, Kevork, to actually say, no, I will not sign the convention, I will not sign the CWC until Israel, for example, signs it too? Wouldn't that give the Syrians, or keep the Syrians in a stronger position? Because, of course, according to Dr. Souheil and Natour here, that was partially supposed to be happening, at least to preserve or to protect the Syrian government in the future.
Farah, we are living in an anarchy international system. I don't believe that there is a real international law. International law only serves the superpowers, those who put this and write this, draft these international laws. Because we have now the UN, which is controlled by only 5 states. They have the only right to impose decisions and conventions on the rest of the states, and the Syrian state is in a weak position now because it's a small state in the Middle East where neighboring states like Turkey and the Zionist state and also the Western states are trying to overthrow the government by using proxies on the ground. But now the Syrian state has no choice but to give this compromise to the Western states to avoid the foreign aggression on the country, which will cause the devastating destruction to the country.
Yes, I really appreciate this useful information that you're submitting. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. Kevork, Almassian, political analyst, thank you for joining us in half a minute. Dr. Souheil, are we saying that politics took over international law and that we lost the total credibility in international law in these conventions that the US up till now are calling other states to apply them at times where they ratified it and they're not applying it? Or at least their allies are not.
Yes, I agree. There is no confidence in the what is called the international law. Without the might, you have to apply it and to oblige the others to abide by its rules.
Yes.
I can give you an example. There are international courts. How can they move to begin discussing the situation of something like Israel, who has breaches on the international law by these nuclear capacities and chemical capacities? We don't have a prosecutor internationally to move, in spite that the release of the knowledge by Foreign Ministry of America or by British companies who are saying that they sold a lot of these things to Israel. No one moved, and the Arabs are asking for the UN to investigate. No one is moving, because we are weak. So if you have a convention, that doesn't mean you have the right. You have to struggle for the right by your force.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Dr. Souheil Natour, a legal researcher. Thank you for all the information that you submitted tonight, and thank you for being with us in Cases.
Thank you.
Dear viewers, that's all the time that we have. Thank you for watching.